Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to follow the concepts that are being developed in current media, and we analyze them. With us today are our co-hosts and discussants, Mark Brennan, professor at New York University. Good to see you, Mark.
Hi, Chris.
And Remy Canario, a graduate of Vassar and now a political analyst. Welcome, Remy.
Hi, Chris.
Remy is
Thank
only
you for
by
inviting me.
okay. Remy is only here by on audio today. So let's get started. The subject this week is: can a surgeon, a CEO, and a real estate developer, can any of them, could they be a good president of the United States? And I think the reason why we're going to consider that is that they're leading in the polls on the Republican side. So we should let's consider it, because all the others are veteran political career officers. So let's start our discussion. First of all, in order to be a president, obviously, you've got to make momentous decisions. And when you make a decision, you're really sacrificing your time and effort and your knowledge for a reward. Like any decision whatsoever, like any person, really like any life entity. Every time a life entity makes a decision, it really is making a sacrifice in order to get a reward. And what incentivizes us to make decisions is that ratio between the sacrifice, that is the amount of information and knowledge that you need, and the time and effort that you need to do something, and your material, and to receive a reward from that effort and material and time and your knowledge that you put into your sacrifice. Once we get that, we have established that these are actually priorities, little bits of knowledge that we use to order our lives. And in the case of the politician, they use their knowledge as priorities to make their decisions in their political lives. In other words, we make our priorities to guide ourselves. They will make their priorities to guide their political decisions. So, and in society, we make these to cooperate. We make these decisions in order to cooperate with others that facilitate our lives. Because cooperation and making cooperative priorities, which equals knowledge, enables us to get better, to make more goodness in our lives. And for a politician, it enables him to make an ideology. And what is an ideology? Well, an ideology is establishing how others should live. And then, of course, the politician has to effectuate this ideology. In other words, he has to try and make other people live by the rules that he is establishing for society. And so the Democratic ideology versus the GOP ideology we're going to discuss in just a moment. But the last thing about any time you make an ideology and you make a decision and you try to effectuate it, you also have something called integrity. In other words, how much do you stick by your decisions? And how are the decisions, and how good are those decisions? So let's go to the ideologies, but the basic difference between a Republican ideology, which should be a conservative ideology, and a democratic ideology, which is which we'll label as a liberal ideology. And let's go down the list here and see how they stack up together. Well, a Republican or a conservative political thought is that the individual first retains all rights. Rights are retained at the individual level. On the Democratic ideology, and I'd like Remy to correct me if I'm wrong after we get through this, I believe is that the federal government retains rights, is the ideology of the left. First, then secondly, what problems that cannot be solved by the priorities of the government then defers or devolves to the state government. And on the Republican side, on the conservative side, after the individual has all rights and he can't solve those problems, societal problems, then they graduate to the workplace and to those he associates with and to those within his society, such as corporations, LLCs, and others with whom the individual works in order to effectuate a product, in order to bring his life up away from misery. As we produce things and make our lives better, we work together with people in order to attain a better life for ourselves. So on the other side, the federal, after the state government, rights are then devolved to the local government on the liberal side, and then to the individual, and then from the individual to the workplace. And on the Republican side, those rights will go to then, after giving up your social rights, will go to the local government, to the state government, to the federal government. And so it's really an inverted system of priorities. Okay, so I mentioned something about integrity or honor in decisions. Well, when a decision has integrity, it has a couple of ingredients. First, it has its morality involved with the decision. And then, after you establish your professed priorities, you adhere to those priorities. And so, these two, morality, establishing your priorities, which involves the morality, and then adherence to that morality will involve the integrity of your decision. Now, the GOP integrity is its conservatism. It involves its conservatism, which it has established as a priority, and it should adhere to that conservatism. And if it were a low adherence, such as we've seen in the Republican Party over the last many years, the politicians are held in low regard, and their decisions are not considered to have integrity. But let's discuss today whether Ben Carson, Donald Trump, and the former CEO Fiorina has integrity enough to do well in the polls, and is doing well enough to be considered to having a great integrity in their decisions. And probably that's why we're seeing them doing well, because politicians have been held in such low esteem recently, whereas these are outside of the normal circle of politicians. The Democratic integrity is, of course, involves its liberalism and its established priorities of its liberalism, and they adhere pretty well to their priorities. So with that said, let's go back and see what Mark and Remy have to say about whether what makes a good president, and whether the Republican, and we can open it up to Hilary too, whether all of these potential candidates have a good potential or have an integrity that would make them a good president of the United States. Would like to open up the discussion. Remy, why don't you start?
Sure. Going off of that introduction that you just gave, I mean, I would say that there is, at least for me, a divergence of opinion of what exactly is the nature of the modern Democrat, and also the nature of the difference between Democrats and Republicans. For me, Democrats do not believe that the federal government, in fact, that the rights come from the federal government. I think there's just much more of a sense that the rights of the individual end where the rights of the next person begin. And it is common in many social and economic situations for the rights of different people to interact. And so in those situations, Democrats tend to believe that whatever creates the greatest common good is correct. But that doesn't mean that the rights begin with the federal government. It's just a different interpretation of a complicated situation. Furthermore, I would argue that Republicans and Democrats ultimately do share many of the same goals. It's just that we have wildly different opinions of how to get there. I mean, I don't think that any Republican or any Democrat would say that they're not for prosperity, that they're not for freedom. It's just a question of what we believe is the most effective means of achieving those goals, and therefore really comes down to a question of epistemology more than anything else. Now, when it comes to the effectiveness of a president, you raised the question integrity. For me, that's a bit of a dangerous term, because I do believe that it's important to look at each individual decision that you're making on its own merits. And I find that a lot of the time, when you are talking about someone's integrity as a politician, you are basically giving a series of litmus tests that basically should predetermine what their actions are, as opposed to giving them the leeway to be able to look at each decision on its own merits. That being said, I believe that the question of integrity becomes interesting when you're dealing with a character like Donald Trump. I mean, would you really say that he has integrity? You could argue that he has his own priorities and that he sticks to them, and so in a sense he does have a lot of integrity. In terms of his ideological purity, that's a little bit less to be determined. But when it comes to an election, I think that what you're really talking about with integrity is predictability of that person's actions once in office. And so if integrity is something that is indeed important to you, Donald Trump should be the bane of the Republican Party's existence. Now, I would say that someone like Carly Fiorina or Ben Carson probably do have a lot of integrity. That being said, one is a disastrous CEO that ruined a great American company, and the other is a doctor. And I happen to know a few doctors, and they don't play nicely with others. And politics is a job that is entirely based off of relationships, and politics is complicated. You don't get to just be the decider, much as George W. Bush tried. You have to know how to create relationships, and although obviously there are exceptions to the rule, doctors, I think, just have a little bit too much of a God complex for that to be the natural assumption for their character.
Okay, I think we lost Mark. Well, be that as it may. Okay, well, you know, you mentioned that Donald Trump probably does have integrity, but we talked about him not being, not knowing the ideals behind him.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that this is a person who knows what they believe. No one thinks that they're a bad person. I'm sure he has, in his own mind, some great reason for everything that he's doing. Whether he has actually nailed that down into a concrete credo for himself, I don't know. I probably don't think so, but he probably, I would almost certainly say that he has some sense of the integrity of what he's doing.
Yeah, but integrity also, I think, involves, it has two components. One, the individual beliefs inside the integrity, and whether those are good or bad or whatever, is part of the of being integrity, of having integrity. For example, if you have a wall and you say that the wall has integrity, it means that what the integrity is made of, the wall is made of, has substance and is well put together. So I think that Trump, when I think that he has an integrity about him. In fact, all three of them, Fiorina and Ben Carson, I should probably say Dr. Carson, all three of them have integrity in the sense that all three have a good philosophical outlook that adheres to the Conservative Party and and will stand by them. And probably they will stand by them because they are non-politicians, and they are not beholding to the political party itself. And whereas all the other ones they work for the government. In other words, they get a paycheck from the government. So that's probably why these three are in the lead. So what do you think? Why don't you go down the line and tell us what you think of the three leaders on the conservative side that are, well, we should probably add Cruz, because Cruz also is leading, but is in the top bunch, and is considered an outsider, even though he is a part of the political party and working and getting a check from the government. But he has done some actions that tend to show he's a true conservative and is a bit of a renegade within the party, and so people like him. And then let's also add in some comments about the other side, what's happening on the Democratic side. Why don't you run down that list, Remy, and let's see what you think.
Could you repeat the question?
Well, I want you to run down all three of the on the conservative side. There are actually four, and then also let's visit the Democratic candidates.
All right. I at this point I'd say that Ben Carson is largely an unknown. He is not exactly loved on the left. I honestly can't say that I have a good enough opinion about him to say anything particularly insightful. I think the fact of the matter is that he remains a long shot despite his current position in the polls. Carly Fiorina is a disaster, who has managed to somehow convince the world to at least temporarily forget that she was responsible for what we now have as HP. Doubling down on laptops and PCs at a time when other companies such as IBM saw that was a dead end. She made the wrong call. Personally, that's not the kind of person that I'd like to have making the decisions in the Oval Office. Now, when it comes to Donald Trump, what is there to say? I mean, he is what he is. He is probably in this in order to make a point, in order to affect the dialogue. I mean, as someone who cannot abide the idea of a Republican president in 2016, he seems like a gift from up above for me. Let's absolutely talk as much as we can about taking away birthright citizenship. Just the fact of the matter is that we're still more than a year out, and what's happening right now is essentially entertainment as opposed to real politics. Now, Ted Cruz is an interesting guy. I would not call him a true conservative because I don't think that a true conservative is as ultimately selfish and willing to be detrimental to this conservative cause as he is. Ted Cruz is in it for Ted Cruz, and it just so happens that mouthing these violently right-wing positions and taking stands and filibustering things that are ultimately detrimental to the party are to his benefit. And so that's why he does it. He knows who his audience is. He's a bright guy, and so he has a plan and he's going to stick to it. In terms of Hillary, I think that she'll do fine. She has her flaws, she has her pluses, and she will be a great next president.
Well, you just said something about Cruz that I thought would, two characteristics that it would seem to me that would make him a good president. One, he's bright, you said. Two, you said that he's also detrimental to the Republican Party. That's probably good in itself. That Cruz is detrimental to the Republican Party.
Yeah.
That's probably good. And that's why the conservative wing or the Tea Party is probably voting for him on the and that's probably
this comes back to something that I said in the beginning. Politics is about relationships. I mean, he has managed to alienate just about everyone in Congress. Can you really imagine a President Cruz having a successful legislative record as president?
The best government is that which governs least, is the conservative expression. So I view that as an excellent way to go. Total gridlock is, as I think Jefferson would like it.
Well, I think that Jefferson would have liked roads being built and ports being maintained and bridges not collapsing. So total gridlock seems a little bit of a nihilistic and anarchic approach to that conservative mantra.
No, total gridlock means government runs as it is and doesn't grow, doesn't change and doesn't grow. That's what happens with gridlock.
Well, it also means that you don't get investment in infrastructure, which will in the long run result in everyone being worse off.
Well, you know, this thing every time a Democrat talks about government, they always say, well, the first thing they say is about infrastructure. Well, what happened to that almost $1 trillion bill that Obama signed the first thing he was office? That was all for infrastructure, but it was zero, almost. I think it was less than 1% that was actually used for infrastructure. So the government and its constituents, I shouldn't say constituents, that the government and its employees, which I include the political class, say one thing and then do another, and I think that's one reason why the three outsiders are ahead on the Republican side of the ledger. You mentioned that Hillary would make a good president. Why don't you expand on that a little bit?
Hillary has been doing this job for a long time, and I'm sorry, but
This job, you mean being president?
Is a job just like anything else. You wouldn't expect a first-year doctor to be as good as someone who's been doing it for 10 years. You wouldn't expect a first-year real estate developer to be good as someone who's been doing it for 10 years. Why should politics be any different? She knows how the government works. She knows everyone, and she has already failed before. And in this day and age, I think that we can all agree that that's a sign that you've had time to learn. I think that she has the experience necessary. I think she has the gravitas. I think that I wish that she would do less self-inflicted harm, but in general, I think that with her in office, you have someone who is going to run effectively.
Well, I think that what makes a good politician is the one that purports an ideology that is commensurate to one's philosophy. And on my side, I like the philosophies being brought forth by Cruz and the other conservative.
Well, that's where we disagree, Chris, because I think that a president who's going to do the job well is much more important than a president whose ideology matches up with your own.
And the reason I don't think I would like Hillary to be president is because her ideology is much different than mine. And Obama, he had been in politics for some time, and he probably is very good at his job, but his ideology drives him to decision making that is so far away from the objectives I feel government should be after that I disagree with him at every turn.
Well, of course. But Chris, here you're talking about Democrats. I'm not talking about giving up everything you believe in. I'm saying in a nominee for the candidacy, the effectiveness of the person as opposed to their ideology, as long as it's within acceptable bounds, is more important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Remy, final word. We've just about our time is just about up.
Sure. Earlier I talked about how it's a fallacy that you can just be the decider as president. I do believe that respect for nuance and the ability to create relationships is extremely important. What's interesting, though, is that this very well might be less true for Republican presidents than it is for Democratic presidents, because it is my impression that Democrats in the legislature will be more conciliatory than their Republican counterparts, or at least I hope so, because the show that we've seen over Obama's presidency has been nothing short of scandalous, not to say treasonous, out of the Republicans in Congress. So I might amend what I said earlier. It's possible that a candidate like Trump, who's going to make decisions from the cuff, could have more success than I gave credit for earlier.
Okay, Remy, thanks for joining us, and here on the Philosophical Angle, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Thank you.